All right, it's 12 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Elevating Sales Skills for Industry Professionals, powered by the Evolved Technology Entrepreneurship Program at the Youngstown Business Incubator. My name is Chandler Fiffick, if you do not already know me, and I'm the director of the program. I want to quickly hand the host over to Mr. John Rossi, who is a senior lecturer at Youngstown State University's Williamson College of Business. If you would like to learn more about the Evolved Technology Program, we service any tech-based or tech-enabled startup located in Northeast Ohio. I'd love to talk to you, so I'm going to put my email in the chat. You can reach out directly to learn more. But with all of that said, we only have an hour, so I'm going to turn the reins to John.
Thank you, Chandler. Great to be with you. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out this morning or this afternoon for a little brief webinar. I appreciate it. I'm over here at the university. Hopefully everybody can hear me fine and you can see the screen. The first screen is a welcome screen, so I hope that's visible to everyone. If not, you can let us know. I'm about 10 years in at the management and marketing department here at YSU. My sole responsibility is in the marketing department, and I teach sales and account management, negotiation, as well as organizational purchasing and sports marketing. I have a history or a career that goes back to 1981, and a lot of what I have done earlier in my career was inceptions of retail stores and running retail operations throughout the United States. So hopefully I can help you understand or better understand how a sales operation or a sales strategy might work best in your business. The agenda today that I've got set up for us, brief overview of the selling process. Some of you may already be familiar with that. I'm going to talk briefly about the integration of marketing and sales. The first steps in most selling stages or selling processes is to understand the customer's needs. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll have a little bit of discussion about effective communication and product knowledge. I'll also briefly address handling objections and closing techniques before we conclude with a question and answer period. So one of the first things that I introduce to most audiences, whether they're students or whether they're corporate or business audiences, is the difference between skills and aptitudes. Sales is one of those, I guess, vocations that you can learn. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be an expert or you have to have an aptitude for it, but aptitude does, of course, help. A lot of people, particularly marketing folks, find their first job in sales, and it's really not in their bailiwick, and they need to move out of that. So if you're thinking about developing a sales force or improving your sales force with new students coming out of college, it's often best to determine whether they actually have an aptitude for sales as opposed to skills in sales. One of the other things that I introduce to most audiences is that everybody sells. And again, if you change the word sell to maybe persuade, that might sound more familiar. And again, most of us often have to deal with people asking us to do something, or we're asking somebody else to do something. And again, effectively, you might call that sales, but most people understand that as persuasion. The other thing that is a perception problem with most sales careers and most salespeople is that you have to understand that sales is what we do for people, not to people. Most of the consumer's perception is that sales are what we do to people. And in fact, the product or services that you offer have valuable benefits that ultimately will benefit the consumer the client, or the buyer. So there's no reason to think that what you're doing is not doing something for them in terms of exchanging value. The other is that most organizations understand clearly that the top line in their business is typically revenue, and revenue typically comes from sales, whether it's marketing and sales integrated, or whether it's just sales, field sales, or whether it's inside sales, where you're generating marketing content and messages that draw customers, clients, or buyers to your organization. Under normal circumstances, most people, most businesses understand the general stages of selling, but I wanted to make sure that we are on the same page with regard to the foundation and definitions. Typically, sales is a sequence of activities or a process. I'll discuss with you in a little bit the 10 steps that we typically go through. But under normal circumstances, what we're looking at is first prospecting or lead generation, identifying customers, clients, or prospects for our product or service. Then we move into a stage where we're opening a relationship with them, and typically that involves what we would normally call an approach. I've done some research. I understand your business. I understand your market. I understand your industry, and I have a product or a service or a solution that's going to benefit you. And then qualifying the prospect. And again, qualifying the prospect means that there's someone that actually could benefit from your service or product. Then I'm able, once I've understood that they're qualified, meaning that they have the money, authority, and desire to do business with you, I can then take the time to present my business or value proposition, and then ultimately, hopefully, convert them to a sale. And then the last part is servicing of that account or servicing of that client or customer. And what has happened, what has evolved effectively, is that prospecting element or component or stage is now being taken over by marketing because of its need for accomplishing the the lead generation part, excuse me. And the other part, that's servicing the account, is typically taken over by another function in the organization or another function in the marketing department, which is typically known as customer service. And a lot of what now is happening in terms of sales, field sales, inside sales, is that opening the relationship and closing the sale are typically now more narrowly tailored to sales functions. And the customer service is left to, again, customer service function, and the prospecting or lead generation part is left to the marketing department in order to communicate the message effectively. So what I'm hopefully going to be able to communicate today to you is just that sale function, the opening the relationship to closing the sale. In order to bring everyone up to speed and stay on the same page, this is typically what is known as the selling process. And again, it's done in sequential order. And what we're looking at is prospecting, pre-approach, approach, presentation, trial close, objections, meeting objections, trial close in response to those objections, and then closing the sale. And again, prospecting is effectively what you might recognize as lead generation. The pre-approach part is the part where you're doing the research, the investigation, the questioning of your client, customer, or buyer to better understand their situation, could be their problem or their challenge, or understanding better their need, which your product or service will fulfill. The approach part is effectively that communication that you have introducing your product and service and your company to the buyer, client, or customer. And then after qualifying them in order to determine whether they have the budget or they have the desire to want to do business with you based on your product or service, you can then take the time to make a full-blown presentation to them with regard to your features, advantages, and benefits. And then ultimately, throughout that presentation, you're going to want to determine whether your message and those benefits that you're communicating are actually fulfilling their need or solving their problem. That's what the trial close portion of the communication in the sales process is about. The other is number 6, you'll see, is objections. And objections are anticipation of questions that you're going to get typically from either your own experience or anticipating what a potential buyer, client, or customer might ask of you. And you want to prepare in advance some responses to those if you can adequately anticipate that those are the kind of questions or objections you might get during a presentation. Then once you've responded to those objections, you can ask again, does that effectively meet your concern with regard to whatever the objection is? And then ultimately move to asking for the order. So the 10-step process is something we use as a foundation to better understand sales and selling. And here it is again in a more detailed outline. The prospect or the customer determine the organization that you would call on. Again, anticipating that you have to qualify them by money, authority, or ability and desire. Most organizations now effectively leave that prospecting part in the marketing department in another function, particularly those that are using digital or web-based or email or other social media lead generation techniques or channels to communicate their product or service and its availability. The pre-approach part or the planning part is typically still set in the field sales representative or inside sales representatives function, where you're planning your product, your communication, your features, your advantages, and your benefits are laid out. And typically we do this in a sort of script fashion to make sure that we understand the customer, align that with our features and our benefits in order to communicate that effectively. And the approach, of course, is, the approach, of course, is where you're actually building the rapport, introducing yourself, your customer, and your company to a prospective buyer, client, or customer. My apologies. The key or the heart of the selling process is the presentation. Again, assuming that you're able to adequately qualify that client, customer, or buyer based on their budget, based on their desire to want to do business with you, and depending on who that individual is or what group in that organization you're presenting to, they have the authority or ability to do business and can give you the answer to moving forward with your proposal. The presentation represents the core or the heart of that selling process. And again, we typically break that down into 3 components: the product or service, depending on which it is that you're presenting, the marketing plan, or the plan by which you will deploy that service in the customer's or client's organization, and then the business proposition, which is all about typically the cost, the return on investment, or the return on objectives, depending upon whether it's a solution or whether it's addressing a challenge or it's a consultative kind of arrangement. And then we move to putting that customer benefit plan, that center component of the presentation of the process together. And again, you want to think about that in 3 sections as well. You want to fully discuss the product or service by using a communication framework that we typically call FAB, feature, advantage, benefit. And under normal circumstances, you would think about your product, and you probably already have, or your service, and you've identified particular features that you've either designed into the product or built into the product as a function of the service. How those create an advantage for the customer, client, or buyer, and then what ultimately is the benefit that they receive from having that feature in the product or service and taking advantage of the advantage in order to achieve the benefits. And again, under normal circumstances, we probably, over the course of time, have a dozen, or maybe even more than a dozen different features that are tailored to specific customers, clients, or buyers. And again, I'll show you in a moment or two how we would lay that out if you haven't done it already. The second part of the customer benefit plan is if it's a resale kind of product. Some have resale products, some don't. But if you have a resale product, the marketing plan is how you are going to help that reseller promote or sell that product. It could be a variety of marketing methods, such as a merchandise plan, or it could be some kind of instructions or signage if it's a retail product. But more in line with a service product, that marketing plan might be something like a training, or it might be something like a installation, or it might be technical support, those things that a user might need in order to make the deployment of your product or service easier for them. And then finally, and again, keeping this in sequence, explain what actually the business proposal is. In other words, what is it going to cost me? What ultimately is the return on investment or profitability? Or in some instances, what is the return on objectives? If you don't necessarily have product or return on investment, you may have return on objectives. We want to accomplish certain things, maybe customer satisfaction, maybe employee satisfaction. How might we be able to understand or quantify that kind of benefit in the business proposition? Some products, some particularly digital and other products, might save time, might save additional processes or steps, and that time saved can be quantified in terms of dollars per hour or project costs not spent, or could be satisfaction in terms of measuring quantitatively what the satisfaction of the service or product is for the customers or the clients. But again, this is in the customer benefit plan 1, 2, 3 in sequence. Oftentimes, field salespeople get pressed to get right to the business proposition and don't have an opportunity to fully discuss the features, advantages, and benefits, nor do they have an opportunity to discuss those additional value-added components that they're delivering in the marketing plan. So what you want to keep in mind is that it should be done in sequence, and you should not be forced or pressed to go right to business proposition for fear of losing out on a discussion about the other two elements of the customer benefit plan. So once the presentation is made, this is then the opportunity usually to take questions or respond to objections. And again, anticipating what kind of objections or what kind of questions you might get is very helpful in that you will already have a prepared response. Once you've responded to the objection or answered the question, it's always good to trial close, what we consider trial close, which is a response that asks if that particular response has effectively answered their questions or resolved their objection in your business proposition. And then finally, and a lot of even professionals forget this step, ask for the business, literally ask for the order. I know it sounds kind of elementary, but a lot of people forget that. They just assume that the deal will transpire or the exchange will take place or the transaction will be done. And again, most businesses should remember to ask for the order. And then the other last part there, number 10, that follow-up and service part. If the sales representative or the representative from the company is still involved in that process, and it's not farmed out to another department like customer service. It's always beneficial to make sure that in that process, the field sales representative or the inside sales representative follows up and services that particular customer, client, or buyer as an account now, and then maintains that relationship. And again, one of the key elements of maintaining that relationship, on average, it's been suggested that gaining a new client costs 5 times more than keeping an existing client. So this part of the process, particularly follow-up and service, is key to reducing your costs, effectively gaining new customers or clients. It's easier to keep new ones than it is, or it's easier to keep existing than it is to get new ones. So if, and again, not yet understanding where your particular organization is, there is a need to discuss a general foundation in terms of sales strategy. And I often build it in this manner, where I've got to formulate a strategy. How are we going to do business? And I'll discuss push and pull shortly, but you want to develop a strategy and have your organization understand what that strategy is, so everyone in the organization is aligned, both marketing and sales. Then you have to literally implement and execute on that strategy that you've developed. And then you'll have to go the next step and make sure that inside that implementation or execution is an evaluation and control of that. And again, most of you are familiar with SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed. Most organizations, regardless of strategy, have SMART goals or objectives. And the evaluation and control part makes sure that you're proceeding along the path that you've identified as your goal. So I think that should sort of lay the foundation for the organizational aspect of selling and developing a sales strategy. The first strategy that is typically deployed in organizations is the push strategy, where we effectively built it and we can now identify consumers, clients, or customers, and we're out there in the field, or we have distributors or wholesalers or representatives in the field that are helping us introduce our product to customers, clients, or buyers. Could be a variety of channel members. Typically, this is a business-to-business kind of relationship. Distributors, wholesalers, and retailers. Push strategy, again, is laid out here in a visual that hopefully makes it a little bit simpler. Our marketing activities, personal selling, might be trade shows, might be other types of promotion, in turn push that product or service out into the marketplace, whether we have distributors or resellers, or we have our own field sales representative. We're using personal selling, trade promotion, and others to get that product in the hands of those that need it or can use it. The other is the pull strategy. Again, in that evolution of marketing, where you've got a function doing lead generation and you have a function at the end of the process, end of the stages, doing customer service, a pull strategy works largely as a function of your marketing activities and your messages to your customers, clients, or consumers. And that's inducing them through that marketing message, that content, inducing them to buy or even go to your website or interact or engage with your organization at that level. And then typically those lead generation or marketing functions that are responsible for prospecting do the qualifying before that lead is handed off to a professional salesperson or a field salesperson or one of your inside salespeople who now have a better understanding of that customer or client, who would normally have done a pre-approach. Maybe your prospecting or marketing function has already done that for the benefit of the field sales representative so that they can immediately address the issues that are present in the client, customer, or buyer. Most organizations try to do both. Some do both really well, some do one better than the other. But again, it's an overarching strategy that may be beneficial to consider for your organization, your product, or your service. Another strategy element that is often considered for organizations is what's called Ansop's opportunity matrix. And as you can see here, there's 4 different approaches. Relatively simple: increase market share among existing customers. Market development, which is attract new customers to your existing products. Or we can have product development, which is create new products for existing markets or present markets. And then diversification, which is new products for new markets. This again goes to the overarching strategy or sales strategy or approach that you're taking to address the market that you serve. Another key element in terms of thinking about strategy is the competitive advantage. Those are the unique features that your company and your products or service offer that are perceived as valuable to the target market that you're addressing. And again, we're going to look at that comparatively against your competition if you in fact do have competition in the marketplace. Typically, the competitive advantage is based on cost. Again, your cost may be lower. Your cost or price to the client, customer, or buyer may be lower, which gives you a competitive advantage. You may have a particular product that's specifically tailored for a particular market or industry. That differentiating factor may be a competitive advantage for you. Or you may have a niche. You may be particularly narrowly targeting a particular industry, a category, or a market with your product or service. And again, that provides a competitive advantage. What I'd like to do is just stretch that out a bit. We often talk about our products and services, the competitive advantage of those, but there are more features that you can communicate through your presentation other than just the product. As you can see in the competitive advantage worksheet, the product attributes are largely feature, advantage, benefit that you're familiar with. The quality of your product, the durability of your service or product, the reliability of your service, the performance of your product or service against benchmarks, could be the packaging or delivery or deployment, could be a warranty or guarantee that you provide, or it could be your brand name. Those are product attributes that we typically see in the feature column. What often gets left out is the company attributes. And again, these are equally as important as the product. Your company's reputation, your leadership in the industry, could be your investment in facilities or research and development, could be just the ease of doing business with you compared to others who might make that exchange or transaction more complex, could be the number of distribution channels that you have, could be the convenience. And again, moving back to customer satisfaction, you may do a better job at customer service. Also, if you have returns or credits, and that's often in the product category, that may be an important differentiating factor that's important to a client or customer or buyer. And then lastly, the salesperson attributes. These are your people who are out there in the field responsible for communicating the product or benefit, or excuse me, product or service benefits, and they have knowledge and experience. They are responsive to customers' needs or problems, those are equally as important to present to a prospective customer, client, or buyer to give you an additional competitive advantage. And this particular table is set up so that you do that for your own company, but you also find at least two competitors in the marketplace in order to do some competitive intelligence on who you're competing against, so that understanding your buyer, customer, or client has alternatives, you are equally as aware of those alternatives and the differentiating factors between them before you meet with your client, customer, or buyer. So the critical questions then become, who are our customers? Hopefully, and certainly most of you have already sort of profiled who they are, what their needs might be, what their challenges might be, what obstacles need to be overcome. Clearly, you want to understand what they expect and what they want. And you have to be able to communicate effectively the value proposition or the unique value proposition for those customers once you've identified them. The other two aspects are the relationship aspect. What kind of relationship do you want to build? What kind of exchange do you want to have? And how do you work together and partner together? That's an important part of maintaining and retaining those customers. And then finally, the managerial kind of decision making that needs to go along with that, which is, who we are, how are we organized, how do we function? And that largely is maintaining your transparency with all of the functions in your organization. So again, thinking back to the foundation and the strategy elements, keeping in mind that sales is a part of your marketing strategy. Marketing itself is a function, of course, but it's also a set of processes for creating, communicating, and delivering value to your customers. And again, that's why we have seen this evolution in the 6 stages that I presented previously, where lead generation is being taken as a particular category or function, and customer service is being taken out as a function as well. And sales is being more focused on maintaining and developing that relationship with the customers or clients. Regardless, most every organization needs some way to manage customer, client, and buyer relations. Typically, it's a customer relationship management software application, or it's an enterprise software application. But the importance is keeping a database, keeping information, both in terms of transactional information as well as profile information, readily available to all of the individuals in the organization that are dealing with your customers, either beginning in the prospecting function or ending in the customer service function. And again, what everyone has to remember is that what we try to work on is an integrated marketing function where our message and our content and all of our channels are consistent and transparent with all of the other activities and tasks and functions being taken on in the organization. And as you can see, in the marketing mix that most of you are familiar with from your days in business school, the 4 Ps, product, price, place, and promotion, they effectively become the elements by which you can put your communication together effectively. And personal selling, along with advertising and public relations and promotion, are only a small function of the overall marketing activity and should be aligned with your sales strategy. So again, the marketing mix, product, price, place, and promotion that you're all familiar with. And the reason I'm sort of drilling down into those elements is because you want to create a communication, or you want to create content that meets the elements of each one of those 4 categories. And again, as we've seen the 6 stages evolve, we've seen the 4 Ps evolve. And there's 2 other Ps that you might want to be considering. Aside from product, price, promotion, and place, you're going to need to think about participation, and you're going to need to be thinking about performance. Participation is because that social media and the digital and the web-based engagement is all about maintaining engagement with your customers or clients. So you're going to have to be really aware, equally as aware of that participation and that communication as you are with the other 4 elements. And probably doesn't need to be said, performance is another P that's added now to the marketing mix, because you have to have key performance indicators or measures that you're constantly looking at to determine whether you're actually accomplishing your objective or goal. And again, that goes back to our SMART objectives. And again, because digital, web-based, and social media all have analytics behind it, that's made that job a little bit easier. But again, those analytics have to match up with your marketing strategy and your sales strategy. So they need to be transparent for the rest of the folks in your organization. Again, these are just some of the things that we would consider in each one of those 4 P categories. And in putting a communication together, you can take an element from the product column, add a price element, add a place element, and add a promotion element in order to effectively deliver a communication or build a theme for content that would be effective in attracting a client, customer, or buyer. So the reason I talked about the marketing concept is because when you get right down to it, if we're fulfilling our obligations in marketing and sales, we're doing a number of things. Typically, we're fulfilling a need, which is matching up our product or service with our customer's need, or we're solving a problem, delivering a solution, or we're overcoming obstacles. We're helping, maybe being more consultative in our relationship, or we're addressing challenges where the customer, client, or buyer has identified a particular challenge, and we're acting as part of a team or maybe a partner in developing a successful solution for that challenge. Regardless of the approach, these are typically universal buyer needs. And again, understanding the needs is a great way to start developing your communication, your approach, to better understand how your product or service both fit or meet those buyers, customers, or clients' needs. Typically, most businesses are looking for increased revenue, increased sales, and certainly increased profits. So if your proposal, your presentation can deliver any one of those elements, certainly you're going to capture their attention and interest. Secondarily, if you can decrease the cost of doing business, reduce their expenses, or reduce their risk, and again, there's 3 types of risk we typically think about: financial risk, of course, operational risk, or reputational risk. If I can help them deliver on any one of those elements, I'm certainly going to get their attention and interest. And finally, and these last 2 typically don't get as much attention as they deserve, increased customer satisfaction or increased employee satisfaction. Again, if I can help my client, customer, or buyer do a better job in doing their business, whether it's selling a product or a service, that's going to be helpful and a benefit that's going to be of value to them. Moreover, if I can help their employees be more efficient, more effective in doing their job, that's going to be an ultimate benefit that they'd be interested in as well. So if you can help them with customer satisfaction or help them with employee satisfaction, again, that will likely capture their attention and interest. and raise their level of desire to probably want to do business with you. And not knowing where everyone is at today in terms of the understanding of needs, you might remember this particular concept or principle from your psychology classes back in the college days, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And again, the only reason I present this is because there is sort of a hierarchy of needs, even in business. This is, of course, for humans or individuals, but there are effectively a hierarchy of needs for most buyers, clients, or customers. That goes hand in hand with the buying cycle. And again, I might be going back to some of your business school days, but typically we think about buying as a consumer and how we go through that process. You might even think of something you bought recently to determine whether you followed these steps as well. First, we start with an awareness of need. Then we move to doing some research. Then we evaluate our options based on the research that we've done. Then we make the purchase, and then hopefully we review or ultimately determine whether that purchase satisfied our needs, met our expectations, or delivered on the promises. That would be a typical customer buying cycle or consumer buying cycle that you might be familiar with. Businesses are not that much different. They're quite similar, but they have a number of other elements that make it a little bit more complex. And for someone in sales or marketing, it's important to understand where the customer is and what it is that they're in need of. So we're looking at organizational buying considerations. What's the buying situation? What's the status? What's the buying process? How do they go about buying, doing business? And who's in the buying center? Typically, a corporation or company, and you might be familiar with this in your own organization, there's a lot of steps to buying for an organization. And again, here's 12 of them that are typically in sequence followed in order to procure or source products or services. These are 7 roles that we typically see: initiators, users, gatekeepers, deciders. And again, this is who am I dealing with? Who's my audience? How should my message be tailored to those individuals and their role? And then what type of buying situation are we up against? Is this a new task purchase? Typically, if it's a new task purchase by an organization, they've gone through or will go through those 12 steps. If it's a modified rebuy or a straight rebuy, they've already done that initial legwork and they're moving forward now with continuing that relationship. And it's just a modification of their existing order, or it's a continuous order or reorder of a product or service. And again, back to the objectives. Similar to those universal objectives, companies have profit objectives, sales objective, market share, quality, customer satisfaction, and employee welfare. These are the kind of elements that you're going to be looking at to determine, hopefully, part of the profile that you've developed for your customer, client, or buyer, so that you can understand and fulfill those needs. Again, trying to get as general as possible, basic buying objectives: right product, right service, right time, right place, right source. If you can keep that in mind, those are your customer or client buying objectives, and your presentation and your features, advantages, and benefit communication should address those. How we doing, Chandler?
Doing great, doing great. I got a little technical
Okay.
issues on my end, but nothing that
All
you
right.
need to worry about.
Thank you. Thank you. As we get towards the end of the communication element, what we see is typically this match. And you might have heard it a couple of times in just your normal course of business: meet the buyer where they're at. Typically, following our sales cycle and our sales process in the sequential steps that we've outlined, and understanding that the buyer has particular sequential steps that they go through, it's important to have that pre-approach or that initial conversation about where they're at in their process to better understand how your product or service will fulfill or meet their needs or potentially solve their problem. So if we're working at the level of fulfill a need, then you're effectively matching your products, features, advantages, and benefits against what their need is. And typically we talk about features are those things that enable the product to perform its function effectively. Advantages are those benefits that deliver value to the customers. And then ultimately the benefits are the satisfaction of the needs or expectations. So again, this is trying to develop a communication framework by which you can clearly and logically communicate what your features, advantages, and benefits are, such that they're directly tailored to the customer's needs once you've identified them. And again, I use these sort of clues for my own purposes. Physical characteristics, buyer would say, so what? Performance characteristics, prove it. And again, I could prove it in a variety of ways: demonstration, white papers, research, customer testimonials. You can do it in a variety of ways. Ultimately, what they're concerned about is what's in it for me. Answering that question is key. And the trial close determines whether your presentation of those features, advantages, and benefits are effectively meeting their expectations. So we typically, in order to prepare a script or in order to be prepared, we typically put it in this sort of matrix or table. And you might want to do that for your own company if you haven't already, such that the feature aligns logically with the advantage, and the advantage aligns logically with the benefit, and then have that trial close communication to make sure that you're on the correct path to identifying and fulfilling that particular need that they have. And again, you could do it with testimonials if that's a necessary area that they're asking or they're suggesting they would like to see. And I'll just do one example: the high energy efficient rating, right? Efficiency rating, excuse me. The advantage of a high energy efficiency rating means that it's going to use less electricity. The benefit ultimately is that it would save that particular customer or client 10% of their energy costs. Trial close question might be, are you interested in reducing your electricity costs? Certainly they would suggest yes, and you might prove that through some research or white paper or customer testimonial that suggested that implementing that particular product or service did accomplish that objective for us. And here is our history. So again, it's simple. Just set up a table, feature, advantage, benefit, trial close. And if you need or want or have available those proof statements, you're welcome to add another column and do that for yourself. This one we talked about earlier with regard to competitive advantage. And this one I suggest, if you haven't done it already, you might want to consider doing it. Develop those product attributes that you think are most important, most aligned with your typical client, customer, or buyer, and company attributes, as well as salesperson attributes, but also complete the other two columns for your nearest or closest competitor. Typically, we'll do a competitor that is lower, and we'll do a competitor that is higher, in order to get some sense as to what kind of alternatives are available to our customers or clients and how we position ourselves against them. Just as a wrap up of this communication feature, advantage, benefit, Fastenal is a local company. Well, it's a national company actually, and they've done a great job of taking that elemental feature, advantage, benefit, trial, close communication framework and use it in their advertising. And if you permit me, I can get it. I don't think I can get it up because we're in PDF. I'll make sure that there's a link that you can see how well they do it in less than 30 seconds. So if you're not in the need fulfillment business, and again, remember, we're doing need fulfillment, matching up our product or service to a need of a customer or client. You might be in the consultative or solution business, solving problems, overcoming obstacles, addressing challenges. There's a different approach that's typically applied to those kind of relationships. And it's often known as SPIN. And it's a 6-step process usually. But in general terms, you start with a better understanding of what the situation is. So you'll have a conversation or an engagement via phone, via email, via internet, and talk to the customer or client without addressing the product or service specifically, and try to identify what their particular situation is. Once you've identified their situation, you can literally understand better what the problem, obstacle, or challenge is, and what their difficulties are, or dissatisfactions with their current approach are, and then move to questioning them with regard to how does that problem affect other related aspects of their business. And then you have a sort of a total or a holistic understanding of where they find themselves and how your product or service might be able to address that for them. And again, the problem and implications are a key part of where your product should be positioned to help them solve that problem or meet that challenge or overcome the obstacle. And again, it's typically a 2-stage, 6-step process where you're having a communication or engagement with them, allowing them to give you the information that you need in order to do the actual analysis. And then once you've done that analysis, come back to them a second time with properly identifying the problem and proposing the solution and making your presentation after you've done that. Now, this particular presentation or proposal will be custom tailored to their specific problem, their specific challenge, or their specific obstacle, which certainly will capture their attention and interest. And then lastly, we're thinking about the sales presentation itself. And one of the key acronyms for thinking about putting together your presentation is attention, interest, desire, conviction, and action. I often think about it as AID California so that I remember the acronym. What I'm trying to do is in my presentation, capture their attention, raise their interest in wanting to do business with me, raising their desire to want to effectively use our product or service or acquire our product or service, and then get a commitment to move forward, and then have them ultimately take action to either engage us or buy our product or service. And again, when I'm thinking about putting together the presentation goal, I'm thinking back to product, marketing plan, and business proposition as my key or core components of my presentation. What's my objective? What do I want to accomplish? Who's my audience? And again, thinking back to those 7 roles that we talked about earlier. How am I going to structure this presentation to be most effective and maintain the customers or clients' interest? How am I going to create impact? Could be through a variety of means or method, visual aids, of course. How will you design and display those visual aids? And then how are you going to stage that presentation? Those are elements that, again, are in advance of actually delivering your presentation or proposal. The presentation goals actually align with those objectives that we talked about earlier. You want to be specific in what you're attempting to do in your presentation. You want to have some measure, of course, could be dollars, could be revenue, could be doing business within the next 30 days or 60 days. It has to be attainable and relevant, meaning it has to be realistic to the expectations that you have for your organization. And ultimately, it has to be timed. You want to accomplish these things as quickly as possible to meet your own organization's objectives. So again, using feature advantage benefit in terms of a communication framework, might be the persuasive communication method that you use. You may have something in your presentation mix that allows them to participate, maybe a trial or a demo. You could, of course, have proof using proof statements or testimonials or white papers. You could have visual aids, content that you've used, or other video elements that create some interest or attention. You could use dramatization. Again, that could be a relationship you have with a customer or client that's been successful in your using your product or service. Or you can literally demonstrate your product or service as part of your presentation. Any one of those would be helpful and beneficial in putting your presentation together. Again, visual aids help increase retention, reinforce your message, reduce any misunderstanding or confusion. They also create a unique and lasting impression. And the most important part, it shows that you're a product expert, a market expert, and an industry expert in your field. Again, simple list of visual aids that can be used in your presentation or as part of your presentation mix. And then finally, how to deliver that presentation is key. Of course, the meet and greet, the rapport building, introducing yourself, your company, and your product or service, how your marketing plan or your deployment plan will be a benefit to your customers or clients, and then finally your business or value proposition. Again, anticipating objections, leaving time for that, and then asking for the order or closing. So handling objections, again, this is typically done in a larger scale, maybe talking about it at more depth. I'm just going to go over handling objections and closing relatively quickly, so you have a general idea of what to expect and how to address them. Typically, objections are of these 6 different categories. And again, you will recognize them when you hear them, of course. The important thing is to listen carefully, actively listen, as we suggest. It might be a request for more information. It might be a particular condition in the situation that's been identified. It could be a true objection, again, meaning that there's no need for that product or service, or it could be a hopeless objection where they're just trying to defer and not do business for whatever reason. And again, breaking them down into major and minor. Are they practical? Are they psychological? Typically, there's a number of techniques to meet objections. The one that I think is most useful is the rephrase the question, particularly if you have an individual in the presentation or in the course of the discussion that is a product expert, market expert, industry expert. Oftentimes the objection comes relatively quickly, and it may be a surprise. Hopefully it's not if you prepared a couple or anticipated a couple. But rephrasing the question gives that expert some additional time to think about what the appropriate answer is to the question that's been asked. I think I put an example in there for that. Yeah, I did. Rephrasing would sound something like, yes, I can appreciate that. You want to know what particular benefits my product has that make it worth its slightly higher price. Again, that rephrasing gives you the brief time to understand the question and develop a effective response. Closing techniques are similar. We can do that at another time, but typically closing techniques are asking for the order. And again, those come at the end of the presentation. Again, one of the easiest ones to remember is the summary of benefits. At the end of the presentation, you would suggest something like, you said you liked our profit margin, you would benefit from our fast delivery, and you're going to benefit also from our credit policy. Is that right? Well, then we should be able to move forward. What you've effectively done is summarize those key components from your presentation in order to move them forward when you ask for the order. So hopefully I've provided at least a brief introduction to some of the key components or elements of thinking more in depth about your sales skills and aptitudes. The takeaway for today is ABCs, of course. Remember to analyze the customer and client needs, present your product or service and company benefits, gain a commitment for doing business, and then provide excellent service. So I hope that's been helpful to you.
I think we're at
And,
1 o'clock now, but I think that if anybody has a question, feel free to unmute. All right. Well, if you're too shy and you still have a question, just email me at cfific@ybi.org and I will get that answered for you. John, thank you so much. That was great. Really appreciate the time.
Great to be with you.
All right. Thanks everybody who's attended.